شاد ماراني شام شيحام كارزوثا يوحنان
شو حالم شيحة مارنا من الشام ويا
كدا عبريشا زي لقور السمية من كاسد يميم كم بقري لتلميذ دي وامريم رابا من يحطيلم هذه يا بابي ويمي كد سميام هويلم أمر طالي شام لا أوحطلم ولا بابي ويميم إلا تبيشي خزي بقاوي وهذا دلام واجبين الليد أذن وذا دعوتكم شادري ما قديل يومام ليلة بثايان شو خالك هاوي بتبالخ ما قديم ونبعلمام بهراي وين دعلمام وكل هذا خميرم رقل اللد أرم وكل طينة من روقم ودريل اللد إنو دوسم يومير طالم سيم خلل بقو معمودي ثد شيلو حام وزلم خللم وثيلم بغزايا. A reading from the Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to St. John. As Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from his birth, and his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be made manifest in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night comes when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." As he said this, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle and anointed the man's eyes with the clay, saying to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Shuha la la minai
شوحة لن شيحة ما
I remember pretty distinctly when I was young, when I was a kid. I'm not even sure what brought this thought to my head, but I remember being really, really terrified of ever becoming blind. It's not an irrational fear. There's something scary about that, but I remember that being something that like just struck me to my heart. That is something I was just really, really scared about. And I think a lot of times the things that we feel can be analyzed. We can understand why we feel a certain way, maybe most of the time. And so if you look into that, well, why did I say that's kind of a rational fear? It kind of makes sense to be afraid of that in some ways. What is it to be blind? What is it in the case of this man that Jesus encounters, who, like a lot of different characters in John's gospel, in some way represents everybody? What is it that's scary, that's reasonable to be afraid of when it comes to blindness? Well, we can see just from the life of this man that Jesus meets, he was helpless. Jesus encounters him, we find out later in the gospel, because he was begging. He wasn't able to, make money on his own. And so he was just so helpless that he was completely relying on the daily charity of others. And that's kind of a scary place to be in, because as everybody learns at some point in their life, it's hard to totally rely on other people. They will fail you sometimes. And it's very possible that this poor blind man went hungry many days because the people that he was relying on just weren't there for him. And in a sense, he was also abandoned, because we find out later in the gospel in this chapter that his parents are around. People go and talk to his parents and they ask him, was he really born blind? Because there's a debate about whether Jesus really healed him. So his parents are around, and yet he's still begging. And it's really sad. It's shameful. Like a lot of people that are considered, I don't know what we call them, like handicapped or not quite there. They're seen as a burden. And even within the Chaldean community, which in general we're a pretty loving community, we're pretty family oriented, but sometimes there'll be a child or somebody in the family who needs special care, and very often they'll be abandoned or seen as a kind of shameful blot on the family, rather than as an opportunity to express God's love. That's a really kind of a shameful thing. And the same thing happened to this poor guy. His parents were around. They found them very easily within a few minutes. And even though his family was around, he was on the street begging. Sad story. So he's helpless, he's abandoned. Because of that, he's hurting emotionally. But even besides that, besides the sort of social implications of that, being in a dark room is a scary thing. Why? Because it's confusing. You don't know what's going on. You don't necessarily know even what's around you. And John is using this event to call attention to something, which is we're all, in one way or another, that blind man. We're all helpless and relying on others that don't necessarily take care of us. We're all, in a sense, abandoned by those that are supposed to take care of us. We are all confused by things that are going on, and we're all hurting. So let's put ourselves in the place of that blind man and look at how his healing happens. Now it starts with this kind of weird debate. His disciples asked, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? It's another very Chaldean thing to ask. It's this really superstitious question. Very superstitious question. That if something bad happens, that means somebody must have done something wrong. And you're being punished for it. And that's superstition. That's not Christianity. That if something bad happened, that means God is mad at you and he's punishing you. Like God is like a really lousy parent that just punishes us when he's mad at us. It's really the wrong way to think. And Jesus answers, neither. That's completely false. Both of those are false. It was, and I'll read it to you in case you're wondering if I'm reading into this. It was not that this man sinned or his parents. Suffering of any kind is not punishment, as if we have to pay some price for some bad thing we did. It's there built into the world. And sometimes there's not really any explanation. In this particular case, and maybe in our case, I'm going to talk about that in a second, the purpose of this was to show God's glory. And maybe the purpose of our suffering is also to show God's glory. But that's up to us in the end. But it wasn't. So I want to remind you this. When some bad thing happens to somebody that you know, don't be like the friends of Job in the Old Testament, going and trying to blame them. Oh, you're trying to, it's not your job to explain why things happen. Bad things happen, that person is suffering, help them out. You're not going to help them out by pointing out what they did wrong. They're in trouble. So this guy's in trouble. And Jesus sees an opportunity to manifest God's glory. How is this man healed? And how are we healed from this blindness that we share with him in some way? Well, we'll see how it starts. Jesus spits on the ground. That's weird. We have to kind of admit that it's a weird thing. Spits on the ground. Something that's embarrassing. Spitting was not like more polite back then than it is today. It was just as impolite. How are we healed? Well, something weird has to happen. Something that we don't understand has to happen. Why is it necessary? It's very necessary that our healing comes about in a way that's very, very strange to us. That is not at all what we expect. You know why that makes perfect sense? Because if we would expect it, then we could have just done it ourselves. If our healing was something that we could understand, we could heal ourselves. And yet we can't. We never can. So something weird has to happen. Something like almost embarrassing. Spits on the ground. And he mixes the spit with the dirt on the ground. It's not sanitary even now. And then he takes it and he puts it on the guy's eyes. Not his eyelids. His eyes. Which is really gross. And it hurts. I used to wear contact lenses, and sometimes if they scratch. So he's got this dirt he just took out of the ground, he stuck it on the guy's eyes, on his eyeballs. That's painful. Again, it's getting even more weird. And this is somehow a symbol of our healing. So it starts out unusual in a way that's jarring and weird to us, and then it gets painful. And I'm sure this poor guy is sitting there wondering what on earth is happening. And he's probably yelling in some way because there's a guy sticking his thumb into his eyes. You guys see, healing is not a comforting thing. Being healed isn't fun. Then Jesus says, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. This is the humbling part. This man's role didn't come until the very end. Our role in our healing isn't at the beginning. At the beginning, we are receptive. And we're receptive of things that we don't understand, that are very mysterious to us, that even hurt. But we do have a role in our own healing. We do have a role. Because if this man would have said, no, what's wrong with you? You're crazy. I can't believe you did that to my eyes and ran away and disobeyed and did something different than Jesus asked him to, he never would have been healed and God's glory would never have been manifested in him. And I think we need to understand the confusing and weird things that happen to us and the painful things that happen to us, maybe that is Christ trying to heal us in a way that we don't get, in a way that we don't understand. And yet, even after the weirdness and after the pain, Christ expects us to be obedient to him. And the command, go and wash in the pool of Siloam, it's also a confusing commandment because, again, remember, the guy's still blind at this point. So Jesus is expecting the guy to make his way somehow to that pool. It's a challenging thing that Christ expects us to do sometimes. To grope our way even though we're blind. The pool of Siloam, which means sent. It's nice. It was fun to read the gospel today because the Greek, which is the basis for the English that I read, has this little explanation, which means sent. Siloam, and then in parentheses, which means sent. The Aramaic doesn't have that because it's an Aramaic word. Go and wash in the pool of sent. What does that mean? Well, the word sent, again, in Aramaic, means apostles. That's the word for apostles. So we're in a weird place, we're hurting, and we're supposed to wash ourselves in the pool of the apostles. That's baptism. That can't mean anything other than baptism and the sacraments in general. And in the end, I think that's what this passage is about. What are the sacraments? What is the Eucharist? What is baptism? What is confession? It is a weird thing that is hard for us to understand. That we take bread and it turns into the body of Christ. That is unusual. That is as weird as Christ spitting on the ground and making clay and sticking it on somebody's eyeballs. And yet it's got this physical aspect that is something that we can contact with, that touches our bodies and our souls. And we don't understand how it works. And sometimes it's even painful, like confession sometimes is painful. And yet the confusion and the weirdness and the mystery and even the pain is part of our healing. And this man obeys and he's healed. And it's something that strikes the entire community. It changes everybody's perception of things. And so our healing, yes, we have a role in it, but our role is also communal. Our role has to do with others. It has to do with the church and receiving the sacraments, but it also has to do with once our healing starts to occur, God is glorified among all of the people. And it's in a way that we didn't understand, and yet we cooperated in our own way. But in the end, I think it's also completely incorrect to read this as a one-time thing. That, okay, right now I'm hurting and I'm blind and I need to be healed, and then I'm going to have an experience, which is great, of healing, good, but now it's done, wrong. That's where you're wrong. It never ends. We are always this blind man whenever we forget Christ's work in our lives. And so every day in a kind of moment-to-moment way, remember that God is attempting to heal us and he's reaching out to us. And it's in ways that we don't understand, and it's in ways that might even hurt. And yet, he is there and he wants us to be able to see him who is the light of the world.